Welcome to iTTV for Form 2 Science. Today's lesson is sensory organs and their functions. We already looked at sensory organs and some of their functions when we were doing our science in primary school. The main sensory organs that we learnt in primary school are very similar to the sensory organs that we learn when we are in secondary school. The sensory organs are the eyes, the ears, the sensory organ of taste, which is our tongue, the sensory organs of smell, which is our nose, and a little bit of the tongue as well, as we will see later on, and also the sensory organs of the skin or the joints or any other part of our body where we might feel something. Now, we really do need our sense organs because what they do is they allow us to detect what changes in our environment. There are many stimulus. These stimulus are actually the changes in the environment around us. If the light becomes dark, if a smooth object becomes rough, if a dull object becomes shiny, all of these are changes that we detect. And any change that we detect, we call a stimulus. A stimulus is due to a change in the environment around us. Now, this is the definition of a stimulus, and you must know this definition. It does come out in your exam. They will say, what is a stimulus? Okay? And you need to be able to say, it is a change in the environment around us. Stimuluses can also come from inside our body, such as we get too warm, or we feel dehydrated, which means we don't have enough water, or we feel out of breath after running, which means we don't have enough oxygen in our body. But for the purpose of this chapter, we will mainly look at stimulus that come from outside our body. Examples of stimulus: sound, light, pressure, and chemicals. Now, why do we need to know these stimulus? Why do we need to be able to detect them? Well, as scientists, we do experiments. Whenever we do experiments, we have to observe what is occurring. Most of our observations occur using our sensory organs. Let me give you one or two examples. For example, this water over here. Just by touching the glass, I will know whether or not it contains cold water or warm water. Now, in an experiment, we sometimes need to feel whether a reaction is becoming hotter or becoming colder, which we call endothermic or exothermic. There are also other things that we need to do in a laboratory that depend on our sensory organs picking up different stimuli. For example, I'll move this water away. Sometimes we need to know if something is smooth or if something is rough. We also need to know if something is sharp, like this, and can poke you, or if something is rounded and is not so dangerous when it hits you. We do experiments in the lab using acids and alkali. If something is an acid, we need to know that it's an acid. Here we are using our sense of sight. This is a bit of litmus, red litmus paper. When I put this red litmus paper into this liquid, I will know whether the liquid is acid or alkali based on the color change. Now, this is using light stimulus. I put it in, like so, and I notice that there is absolutely no color change on the red litmus paper, which means that this is probably acid. You see, by doing these kind of experiments, we basically know whether there is or not a change, whether there is acid or alkali. Another one. Here I have some iron. I'm going to take some iron and put it into this liquid. Now, if there's a reaction, I need to be able to see what happens. So let's just put these iron filings in here. Okay, and just give it a bit of a stir, like so. And what we notice in here is that there are some bubbles being produced at the bottom. Well, now, you see, I'm using my senses once again. I'm able to see the bubbles rising up. I can make an observation. There's actually a strong smell coming out, which means there must be a gas being produced. All of this, once again, mean that we have to use our senses to detect changes that occur. And this is the most important thing that we scientists do in a lab. So please don't underestimate how important our senses are. Yes, they're very important in our general life, but they are also very, very important when we do experiments. Now, in order for us to detect these changes in the environment, which we call stimuli, we have special organs that are designed for this. We've already identified these organs. Let's go through each organ and have a look at what are the stimulus that are detected by each of the organs. Each sense organ detects a type of stimulus. They don't overlap. Each one has got its own specific job that has been given to it. The function is to take in the stimulus information and relate it to the brain. Any information coming in needs to go to the brain. The brain will then analyze it for us and make a decision for us. Ears detect sound. The nose detects smell. Skin detects pain, touch, hot and cold. Eyes detect light changes. And finally, the tongue, which is there to detect taste. So these are our main sense organs: the eyes, the ears, the skin, the tongue, and finally, our nose. Each sense organ has receptors that collect the information. Now, these receptors are special cells. They've changed their shape and size so that they can do their job very, very well. What is this job? Well, the job is to pick up this information coming in from the outside and send this information along to the brain. Most of the time, the information will be sent to the brain in the form of what we call a nerve impulse, which is a small amount of electricity that we produce in our body. The electricity is of a very low current and voltage, not enough to damage us, but fast enough to get to the brain quickly so that the brain can make a decision as fast as possible for our own good. The shape of receptor cells are different based on their functions. As you can see in the slide that you have on your screen, the shapes are quite different depending on what we have. For vision, we have what are called rod and cone cells. For hearing, we have what we call hearing cells. For smell, we have what are called olfactory. Olfactory cells are specialized cells in our nose that pick up chemicals. They're very similar to the taste buds. The taste buds are the cells on the top of our tongue that pick up chemicals that then are changed into a taste sensation. Next, we have what are called free nerve endings. These are mainly to detect pain in our skin. Finally, we have what is called the Meissner corpuscle. The Meissner corpuscle is a specialized receptor cell that we use for touch. It tells us if something is smooth, rough, hot, or cold. So remember, each one of these receptors is very, very specialized so that it can pick up these tiny changes in our environment so that we can understand what is happening around us. The information is sent to the brain by sensory nerves, sometimes also called sensory neurons. Most of our receptors are connected to the brain by neurons. We call them sensory neurons because they come from our sense organs and go to the brain. We have another type of neuron which is called a motor neuron. This one's function is to go from the brain to the muscles. And we'll talk a bit about those later on when we talk about the response mechanism in our stimulus receptor brain sensory systems. Information is sent by a nerve impulse, an electrical message. So imagine this, whatever stimulus enters, example, sound. The sound will enter into our ear. It will make its way all the way to the receptors inside the ear. Here what happens is the receptors are stimulated by the stimulus. When the receptor is stimulated, it shoots out these nerve impulses, these electrical messages, which then travel along the neuron, the sensory nerve. Just like electricity travels through a wire. It travels very, very quickly to the brain, to a particular part of the brain, not just to the whole brain. Each part of our brain is compartmentalized, which means different areas of the brain have different jobs. Example, the back of our brain here is for sight. The sides of our brain here are for hearing. The top of our brain here, this is mainly used for smell and taste. Now, each one of these areas will be stimulated by the correct nerve. Example, I can see the camera in front of me. The light from the camera is stimulating the rod and cone cells in my eye. The rod and cone cells in my eye shoot messages to the back of my brain here, and my brain analyzes the information and basically says to me, you are looking at a camera. That is how our system works. We have a stimulus which is picked up by a receptor. The receptor sends an electrical message through the nerves to the brain. Now that we've gone through what our sense organs are, what stimulus are, and what the stimulus is detected by, which is these receptor cells, let's try a few questions to test our knowledge. Question 1. Sensory organs allow us to what in the environment? Sensory organs allow us to dash in the environment. Remember, what are we trying to detect? Think about it. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. Detect changes. So, sensory organs allow us to detect changes in the environment. Let's try another question. The change in the environment is called a dash. So remember, what are we trying to pick up from the environment? Any change that we have has got a particular name for it. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. stimulus. So the change in the environment is called a stimulus. Let's try a third question. The stimulus is detected by special cells called what? So remember, you have a change in the environment. This is called a stimulus. When the stimulus comes into contact with us, we detect it. We detect it using special cells that are called, let's find out what they're called, receptors. The stimulus is detected by special cells called receptors. Let's try one last question. The information is sent by what? The information is sent by what? So what we're talking about here now is from the receptor to the brain, the information has to travel. How or what or through what does the information travel? Let's have a look at the answer. Nerves. The information is sent by nerves. You can also call them neurons. There's no difference between the two. Now it's time to continue on. Let's move on to what happens when we reach the brain. The brain analyzes the sensations. Whatever the stimulus is that we've received, whether it's light, sound, pain, hot, cold, pressure, some sort of smell, or some kind of taste, in the end, this information is sent to the brain. The brain then will analyze all of these informations or sensations. It's up to the brain to decide whether or not it is good for us, bad for us. The information sent to the brain can be pleasurable, painful, dangerous, or joyful. Remember, all of these decisions that your brain makes are based on your own individual experiences. Let me give you a simple example. Two people could be eating durian. To one person, their brain is saying that this is a pleasurable experience. That means in the experience of this person, durian tastes good and smells nice. To another person, the brain may be saying that this is not a pleasurable experience. Here, this person obviously does not like the smell or the taste of durian. So please understand that the decisions your brain makes are totally dependent on the experiences that you've had in your life up to the point where the stimulus arrives at your brain. So remember, whatever experiences you've had combined with the stimulus, all of this goes into your brain, and then your brain will analyze it. It will decide, once again, whether it's a good or a bad experience that you're having, and then it will decide what you should do, whether you should stay or whether you should run. The brain decides what to do. This is called a response. So, we started with a stimulus arriving. We've sent the message to the brain. The brain now decides what to do. This is called the response. This is the second part of the mechanism. Once the brain has decided what to do, what the response is going to be, it will send a message to the correct place. Normally, the brain will now send a message to the muscles. Most of our responses are movements. If you like the durian, the brain will send a message to your muscles for you to get another piece of durian. If you don't like durian, your brain will send a message to the muscles in your leg, which will make you stand up and walk away. So most of our responses deal with messages being sent to our muscles, and then our muscles doing the appropriate job that has been asked of it. A response can be to run away, pull hand away, pick up, taste, or eat. It totally depends, once again, like I said, on your experiences and the final analysis of the brain. The message is sent from the brain to the effector muscle by the motor neuron. So remember just now, from the receptor to the brain, we went through the sensory neuron. From the brain to the muscle, we go through what is called the motor neuron. It is quite important for you to remember the names of these two types of nerves. So remember, any information coming in is going to travel to the brain through what we call the sensory neuron. Any information coming out from the brain, going to your muscles, goes through the motor neuron. Sensory neuron goes to the brain, motor neuron takes information away from the brain. Please make sure you know the two differences in these two neurons. We start with the stimulus. The stimulus goes into a receptor. The receptor goes into a sensory neuron. The sensory neuron carries a nerve impulse to the central nervous system, which is our brain. The brain makes analysis. The brain then sends a nerve impulse through the motor neuron to the effector, which is normally a muscle, and the effector causes us to make a response. This is called the nerve impulse pathway. And it's very important that you know the nerve impulse pathway because it always comes out in the examination. So remember, we start with the stimulus. The stimulus goes to a receptor. The receptor sends the message through the sensory neuron to the central nervous system or the brain. The brain, after analyzing, sends a nerve impulse through the motor neuron to the effector, which is normally a muscle, and then the effector causes a response, which is you pick something up, you push something away, you pull something, throw something, walk away, run away, walk towards, or something of that effect. So this is basically how our nervous system works. Let's try a quick question before we summarize today's lesson. What is the pathway for a nervous response? We've just gone through this, so you should remember the steps. There's about 6 of the steps. Remember, you start with a stimulus and you're always going to finish with a response. Okay? You need to be able to fill in all the blanks in between. Take your time, slowly go through it. Remember, stimulus has to be detected by and the thing that detects the stimulus then has to send a message through a type of nerve to the brain. The brain sends the message back through another type of nerve to your muscle, which has a particular name. And then finally we have our response. Okay? Let's have a look and see what this pathway is. Stimulus, receptor, sensory neuron, brain, motor neuron, effector, and finally response. Please remember this nervous pathway. You're going to use it quite a lot as we go through all the other sense organs in this chapter. That's all for today's lesson. Thank you for watching iTTV.